finished those bellicose comments and referring to the leader of another country as Rocket Man, and that the United States would intend on destroying Rocket Man if he keeps saber rattling like this. They certainly have a funny way of showing it. The Dow spreading to new highs today. The S&P in and out of new highs. Let's get the read on those forceful comments from the military assistant to Donald Rumsfeld, Steve Bucci, and the former aide to one Margaret Thatcher, Nile Gardiner. Now, the read from abroad in the foreign press, what I was able to glean online, was not favorable, that this was not the way leaders speak at the United Nations. What did you make of that?
Well, I thought it was actually a very good speech, arguably Donald Trump's best speech of his presidency so far, alongside his Warsaw address in the summer, where he launched a strong defense of Western civilization. This was a very blunt speech. It was very direct, and I thought it sent a very clear message to America's enemies that they will be held to account. Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, for example. This was a president who was not afraid, I think, to take on those who threaten the free world. It's a very different kind of address, the sort of, wishy-washy speech delivered by Barack Obama on countless occasions at the UN. This was a very, very tough speech. I thought it was the right message to send at an extremely dangerous time for the US and its allies on the world stage. So well done, Donald Trump. I thought he did extremely well today.
Steve Bucci, obviously the president was well aware a North Korean delegation was sitting in the front row, but feet from him. And he had to know as well, even though the Chinese premier was not there, and neither was Russian President Vladimir Putin, that he was singling out those countries for enabling North Korea. How do you think that was received?
Well, President Trump doesn't do nuance. He just says it like it is.
That, right.
And goes for it, and isn't worried if somebody's going to wring their hands about it. So, yeah, this message went to the countries that Nile just mentioned, but also to China and Russia. Not that we're threatening them, but letting them know that we're holding them accountable as well, and they need to play a positive role in sort of ratcheting this thing down, or they'll see us respond.
All right, the question then was what kind of response? Now, of course, it's one thing to talk tough. The president has to follow up on that. And the indications are that he is kind of sick of the United Nations and the jawboning back and forth and the threats and the watered down sanctions and the like. So what do you think he is telegraphing to them?
Well, I think he's letting them know we're ready to take offensive action if that's what's required.
All right,
I don't think we want to do that.
We are ready to take offensive action. Of course, the United Nations bristles at that sort of thing, but what do you think?
Yeah, I think
Niall
it's very...
Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sorry. I think it was very clear that, President Trump is prepared to use military force against America's enemies, and you always have to have that threat of force to back up any kind of, efforts you're making at the United Nations or diplomatically on the world stage. I thought that was one of the most significant aspects of this speech, of course, the very powerful condemnation of Iran, and I think a very clear signal that the administration may be about to walk away from the Iran nuclear deal. And I think it would be right for the United States to walk away from this disastrous agreement, which has only made Iran stronger. So I think this speech does telegraph potentially a U.S. withdrawal from that agreement, which I think should be welcomed.
Steve Bucci, one of the things that comes up is mentioning that Iran deal and the fact the president never liked it during the campaign, had hinted many times wanting to walk away from it, realized the risks of walking away from an international agreement, even though this isn't really a deal with part of an international agreement, but that it would be precedent breaking in the decorum of the United Nations to even consider doing so. Yet there were polite applause to what the president was outlining, even though I imagine a lot of folks were seething. What did you make of that?
Well, again, President Trump doesn't much care who's seething. He's not really worried about decorum. He's stating what is in the interest of the United States of America. That deal is a lousy one. It does not benefit us a bit. In fact, it is very, very detrimental to the United States and our security.
But what does he have to prove, Steve, to show that the Iranians have violated it? Now, he talks about violating the spirit of that agreement. But one of the things would be helping the North Koreans or aiding them in one way, shape, or form that you'd have to prove to the United Nations that we could do whatever we want. I understand what you're saying. But to sell that case to an international body that doesn't seem to flip over Donald Trump, whether that's fair or not, I'm not here to judge. It just seems a little weird that they're judging us, but they are. And that this president might abrogate a deal without proof that the Iranians are violating it. What do you think he would seize on?
I think if they were helping North Korea and we had evidence of that, not necessarily trial-like proof, but something that we could hang our hat on, I think he would go with it. Or if they continue to take the kind of actions they're doing with their missile tests,
right.
We might shoot one down and let them know, hey, we're not playing anymore. We've got to defend ourselves. Neil, we've got to defend Hawaii. We've got to defend Guam. Right now, Hawaii is less well defended than Guam when there's millions more Americans there and the Pacific Command headquarters. That's a very likely target. We've got to protect it, and we got to make sure they understand we're going to protect it, and then we're going to respond.
You know, Nile Gardiner, I was thinking of your old boss, Margaret Thatcher, that for many in the United States, this might have been Donald Trump's Maggie Thatcher moment, his speech before the UN.
Yeah, I think she would have liked this speech, actually. She would have admired the fact that, you know, Donald Trump was willing to stand up for the United States, for American leadership. She also would have loved, I think, his talk about the defense of national sovereignty. And a lot of the language that Trump used, actually, is very similar to the language used by British politicians, actually, in defense of Brexit, the defense of self-determination, the right of nation-states to forge their own future, protect their own borders. And I think there was a lot of Brexit DNA, actually, in this speech as well, which I think a lot of British people would support.
All right, gentlemen, I want to thank you both as we're getting in responses from those here in this country and other countries of